Hi there, welcome. This is the Kelly's Astrology podcast, where you can find insight, guidance, and understanding through astrology. I'm Kelly, and I'll be your host. Hey there, everyone, and welcome to episode 4. We're going to be taking a look at the astrology of the week starting July 15, and there are a couple of important astrological events to share with you in this middle part of July. This is the most significant part of the month, astrologically speaking, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about why in today's show. I also have a coupon code that I'll be sharing at the end of today's show. That is to save 10% off the 2 Saturn transits webinars that I have. And once you've heard the show, it'll make sense as to why I'm sharing that coupon code in this week's episode. But for now, let's dive in. So July 17 is a really important date, and there are 2 astrological events happening on the 17th. July 17 you can think of as a day that brings a fresh start as well as a major shift. So first up, we have a new moon on Monday, July 17. This is a new moon at 24 degrees of Cancer. Now, if you're in Australia, that new moon is going to hit on Tuesday the 18th, but for most people in most other locations, it's going to be July 17. So the new moon is at 24 Cancer. And this new moon can really inspire a new approach to nurturing and caretaking. It's a new moon in the sign of Cancer, which is so much about the sort of mothering archetype, but it's ruled by the moon because anything in Cancer is ruled by the moon. And the moon, of course, at the time of the new moon is in Cancer. So there's sort of this double strength Cancer signature. And that happens every year when the new moon is in Cancer. So we've got a new approach to nurturing and caretaking coming forward. You might explore how to better take care of yourself and your loved ones. Cancer is really a sign about themes of both protection and survival. So there's caretaking, but there's also ensuring that survival, protection, that, the young or the vulnerable are looked after, and so that we can all kind of grow and move to the next stage, whatever that might be. So with those themes of protection and survival, we're really thinking about it from the perspective of what's necessary or what's essential to keep things alive and growing. Do we need, when I think about the garden or my indoor plants, they need a certain amount of light and they need to be watered. What do you as a being, as a creature require to be nurtured and grow? Is it social time? Is it quiet time? Is it movement? Is it certain types of lifestyle or food choices? So that idea of that question, if you like, about what is necessary to keep things alive and growing, that's a question that this new moon asks, and I hope it helps you answer that question. So you might be reviewing who and what you're taking care of. You might also be reflecting on the cost of caretaking. One of the other things I think this new moon in Cancer is really great for, we often think about taking care of others, but I think this new moon in Cancer also serves as a good reminder to check in and see how you're taking care of yourself as well. Now, this new moon in Cancer does form an intense opposition to Pluto at 29 degrees of Capricorn. So with Pluto in the mix at this new moon, there may be some power themes, there might be hidden feelings, and there might be sort of a growing awareness about undercurrents or things that have been unspoken. You might gain some insight around a deeper motivating factor. Like you might come to understand why you do certain things or why you avoid certain things. You might get a better sense of what's really driving you or kind of compelling you. And with Pluto in the mix, in that opposition aspect to this new moon in Cancer, you might uncover a secret related to the past. So we've got lots of kind of everyday current themes with the new moon in Cancer about caretaking and nourishing growth. And then with the link to Pluto, we've got this sort of what's going on behind the scenes or what's happening beneath the surface and how might I need to attend to that. The new moon each month is always a chance to reset. It's a fresh start, and it definitely encourages you to begin something, to start over or to start. And in general, this new moon in Cancer is great for all of those things. So if you're thinking about a new lifestyle plan or routine, if you're thinking about a new strategy with food and eating or self-care and wellness, or you want to put a new family routine together or a new routine together with friends, this new moon in Cancer is a great time to think about that. You don't have to do all of these new moon things on July 17. You can actually do it in the days immediately following, but that energetic reset happens on the 17th when the new moon happens. So with this month's new moon in Cancer being linked to Pluto, there's this funny little energy that comes up around the idea of the beginnings of the new moon being tied to needing to sort out something old or deal with something from the past before you can actually do that new thing or move forward. It's almost like you want to plant the new seeds, you want to grow in a new direction. And I think about the garden analogy, which is, I've been doing this a lot in the garden this year. We've had some weeds that have grown up. Some of you will know from following me in other platforms previously that we did a big renovation at our house last year. And that meant I didn't do as much gardening as normal because we had contractors and workers in, and we had equipment, on the grass and on the driveway. And I just couldn't get to parts of the garden that I would normally be tending to. And one of the consequences of that I'm noticing this year is there's a lot more weeds showing up in very random parts of the garden. And so I'm having to spend a lot more time weeding, kind of like that's the detox for the garden, if you like. And so I think about that with this new moon in Cancer linked to Pluto, that I want to plant new things. We're trying to put more native plants, more plants that are local and indigenous to the area in the garden. And I'm trying to get rid of some of the invasive weeds, but I can't do the things at the same time. I can't plant the new plants until I have dealt with the weeds. And that is a little bit of an analogy about what this new moon in Cancer opposite Pluto is about, is that you want to plant or begin the new thing, but you're going to need to deal with something that is pre-existing or maybe in the way first. And because of the Cancer, Pluto themes, that thing that's in your way is probably very old. It might be tied to the past. It might even be linked, going back as far as your own childhood. So when you think about me weeding in the garden before I can plant my beautiful new plants, that's kind of what you want to be doing. Not just this week with the new moon in Cancer, but the new moon themes do last for 2 weeks. So it's a mix of weeding out the old, getting rid of things that are taking up time and energy or draining you so that you can then do those fresh plantings and you can do that reset or that fresh start. So the idea here is that to move forward, it might require you releasing or weeding out something from the past. You might realize you need to kind of stop a habit or a behavior that is not taking you in the direction that you want to go. It might be that you're doing a type of decluttering of your physical space or of your environment or of your schedule. You're just weeding out unnecessary obligations, for instance. So letting go of something you've outgrown is going to be the key to getting that new growth or that fresh start this week. So some of the themes that will be highlighted by this new moon in Cancer opposite Pluto combination include beginnings, nourishment, intensity, and transformation. And those themes will be active for 2 weeks starting July 17, starting on this new moon. So those themes really influence the rest of July because the next lunation or until the next full moon, the full moon will be August 1st in Aquarius. And so this new moon in Cancer energy runs for 2 weeks until we get that full moon energy coming through. So that's the new moon, July 17. It's our once a month reset and fresh start. On the same day as that new moon in Cancer, we have the nodes changing signs. So the North Node and the South Node are changing signs. On July 17, we have the North Node moving into Aries and we have the South Node moving into Libra. Now, this starts an 18-month cycle or process that is going to bring some shifts and adjustments, particularly to do with relationships and alliances. So think about that nodal shift as beginning a new 18-month cycle or energetic influence or transit that is going to take us through to January of 2025. So that's what I mean. July 17 is a really interesting day because we get that kind of short-term reset with the new moon, and we get this longer 18-month cycle changing over as well. So you might, or if you're familiar with your own personal birth chart, pay attention to the topics of the Aries and Libra houses in your chart. They are going to be the areas of life that the nodes are going to influence over the next 18 months. And the influence of the nodes is agitation. They tend to stir things up. They sometimes feel like they're destabilizing things so that we can figure out how to do these areas of our life differently. Now, in general, Aries and Libra are about the balance between self and other. And that's how we get the nodal transition into Aries and Libra having to do with relationships. It's not just personal romantic relationships. It's alliances, it's loyalties, it's allegiances. You know, who do you pair up with and who do you avoid? But also, how do you go after things individually as well? So it's sort of this independence versus partnership paradigm that the nodes in Aries and Libra are going to start activating. Now, all this talk about an 18-month cycle beginning on July 17, that does mean that the last 18-month cycle is ending on July 17. And that previous 18-month nodal cycle had to do with the nodes moving through Taurus and Scorpio. That cycle began in January of 2022. So one way to think about this is that a cycle that began in January 2022 is ending on July 17. And so I want you to think about the past 18 months and think about where and how you've made changes in your life, where you've dealt with things being unsettled or uncertain. Maybe you've reclaimed your power, or you've detoxed and decluttered, or you've shifted your perspective around certain topics. Not about your whole life, but just about 2 or 3 areas of it. Taurus and Scorpio generally do have to do with finances, with resources, with money, with loans, with investments, and all of your possessions, the stuff, the physical stuff that you have. And so maybe you have a new attitude to the things that you own. Maybe you're focusing on quality rather than quantity. Maybe you're focusing on the emotional side of things rather than the stuff side of things. So another way to think about this last 18-month cycle, of course, is to tune into your own chart again and look at the topics of your Taurus and Scorpio house areas. For instance, maybe Taurus is 4th house of home and family, and Scorpio is 10th house of career and life direction for you. And those 2 areas of life have been a little unsettled, and you've had to make some offload decisions. You've had to maybe ditch obligations or people or duties in those areas of life so you can really streamline towards the heart center in that area of your life. So as you think about the last 18 months, whether you're doing it with a really direct awareness of your own chart or you're just thinking in general in that time frame in your life, I want you to give yourself a pat on the back. Acknowledge what you've been able to update and change. Have some grace towards yourself in terms of the things that maybe you'd wanted to change in that time frame that you didn't quite get to. And then allow yourself to kind of shift focus, to kind of understand that last 18 months chapter is kind of winding down. And as you give yourself permission, I did a great job in these areas, and there are some areas that I didn't quite get to, we'll catch them on the next go round. Because with the nodes changing signs, our areas of focus, our energetic awareness are shifting. And so you want to give yourself permission to turn your attention towards new goals, new projects, or new challenges that are going to occupy your energy and attention over the next 18 months. And I think independence is going to be a huge part of this. The transiting North Node is coming into the sign of Aries. And so we're going to be thinking about making choices that are really good for us as individuals. Doesn't mean we're going to be giving up all our relationships, but we're looking to find that new balance in partnership so that we're not sacrificing self as we're partnering or interacting with others. So the nodes, the North Node and the South Node, they can show where you've outgrown old habits and patterns, and they can also show where you're really ready to embrace a new perspective. And so I would invite you to consider how your priorities and perspectives have changed from where you were 18 months ago or 8 years ago to where you are now. and if you can bring those new perspectives into your actions and your daily life. That's kind of the goal with the nodes. As our priorities change, it's only natural to express those changing priorities by making new and different choices. And making important choices is such a big part of this week, partly because of the nodes and also because of an aspect from Mars to Saturn, which I'm going to talk about shortly. But just on the node piece, because it does have that interpersonal connection, as you're thinking about these new priorities and perspectives, you're going to find that making these more updated choices is leading you towards some projects, some topics, and some people, and it's actually going to lead you away from other projects or people or topics. So give yourself permission to end things and start something new, is essentially this nodal shift at this point in time. I did also promise in our previous episode that I would mention the Mars opposite Saturn aspect, and that is a huge aspect through the middle of July. So that's what I'm going to turn our attention to now. Mars will oppose Saturn 6 degrees Virgo to 6 degrees Pisces, July 20th, July 21st, if you're in Australia. And this is arguably one of the most important aspects that is forming this July. So it's one of the biggest events of the whole month. Mars opposite Saturn can indicate a major choice or decision. It can bring a reality check. This aspect can also highlight a really significant turning point. And it's really likely that there's going to be themes of consolidation and restructuring. Now, Mars moved into Virgo last week, July 10th, and you might be feeling some of this already. When I say this aspect peaks on July 20th, it comes to its strongest expression. And I would say July 20th plus or minus 3 days, we're kind of under the effects and the influences of Mars opposite Saturn. Now, if you have planets at 6 degrees of any of the mutable signs, so 6 degrees of Gemini, Virgo, Sagittarius, or Pisces, then this Mars opposite Saturn aspect is going to be really strong and really important for you personally. But even if you don't, it's such a big part of the astrological weather this week that I suspect you'll feel this Mars opposite Saturn aspect in one way or another. Now, as Mars opposed Saturn, there is also likely to be some frustrating moments too. It is an aspect, one of the key words I often go to for Mars opposite Saturn is frustration or thwarted desire, thwarted will. And I want to explain why. Mars is a planet that wants to move, make things happen. Mars is very quick. It's like, let's do it now. Let's take action. Whereas Saturn is a planet that invites caution and consideration. Saturn wants you to double check your plan and make sure that you're really sure of how to do the thing you're wanting to do, but also why you're doing the thing that you're wanting to do. So when Mars opposes Saturn, part of the contraction and consolidation may be the realization that you can't do as many things as you would like to do. And so with this type of aspect, doing one or two things really well is more important than doing lots of things in a half-hearted way. And so you want to think quality over quantity. And what that can mean is that if you're the type of person that often has lots of things on the go, things might come to a bit of a head where you're feeling pressured or a bit squeezed. You might be feeling really tight for time or really spread thin. And if that happens as Mars opposes Saturn, that's going to be a little clue that you are going to need to embrace the Saturnian way, which in essence typically means saying no more often. Mars opposite Saturn can also reveal tension around timelines. Mars really likes the short-term solution, the quick results, the immediate fix, while Saturn is instead really focused on the long term, and Saturn is interested and invested in outcomes that benefit the you of the future. So really, Saturn is saying, I want you to do things now, mid-July 2023, that you won't even see a reward for like a decade. Whereas Mars is like, but can I do this thing now and feel good about it right now? And Saturn is like, no. Think about Saturn as that kind of voice of wisdom, the voice of kind of the elder who's like, I've been around the block a few times and I have a sense that we need to approach this with a little bit more wisdom. We need to draw on our past experience. We need to come from a more mature place where we're not rushing and we're not worrying about immediate things. We do need to keep our eye on that long-term prize. So usually when Mars and Saturn interact, Saturn's priorities are what take over. And so this week you might find you have to set aside some short-term undertakings or intentions so that you can put some energy and time towards longer-term things. That can be to do with your health, to do with your relationships, to do with your finances. But it's less about, in the financial space, it's less about getting a great deal on something now and more about putting that little bit of extra away for the future. Because Saturn also highlights those sometimes boring but really necessary parts of our life. For example, Saturn is really interested, if this Mars Saturn aspect shows up around health or physical wellness for you, it might be the reminder about needing to make time for exercise or movement. Maybe you feel better in the short term, but we also know that exercise is like an investment in our future mobility. In the financial zone, this can be about paying off debt or saving for retirement rather than going out for that lovely dinner in the short term. That's something that I often struggle with, and I have to really embrace that Saturnian wisdom of like, what will future Kelly really feel good about? Even the extra effort, but the massive added health benefit of cooking for yourself, for instance. It's a little bit more time consuming in the here and now, but much better for you over the coming days and weeks to have a home cooked meal or eat food prepared in your kitchen than rather, have takeout, for instance. And the theme in all of these instances is that you're dealing with this classic Saturn theme, which is the idea of short-term pain or effort for long-term gain and benefit. And so essentially, Saturn is trying to teach us all a little bit about how important the next decade is and how 20 years is from now and how we need to attend to that. Maybe not every moment of every day, but certainly through this middle part of July. Now, Saturn is also the planet that we typically associate with this concept of saying no or indicating a delay. This is the opposite of Jupiter, which is the planet that says yes. And when we talk about Jupiter, it's like, say yes, do all the things. But when we're talking about a big aspect, especially from Mars, which is about energy and motivation, linking to Saturn, there are going to be some weariness. Some of us are going to feel tired. Some of us are going to get a reality check about how much we're doing and how unsustainable that is. And so with Saturn being a planet that can indicate delays or typically about saying no, that may be a part of life this week. You might experience a delay. Something you've been looking forward to might get pushed off, or it just may not be happening as quickly as you like. As Mars bumps into Saturn, it's a little bit as if the cosmos is handing each of us a report card about one or two topics and areas of our life. And if you are feeling a bit frustrated, I'd invite you to take the longer perspective. Think about saying no when that's your genuine response, instead of feeling like you're saying yes out of guilt or obligation. Saturn loves it when we each take responsibility for our own experiences and outcomes as best we can based on our circumstances. And so as Mars faces off with Saturn, you might need to set a new boundary or limit. That sounds really fun, but I don't have the time for that this week. Or I'd love to help you out, but if I do that, I won't be able to do this thing I need to do for myself. So that clarity and reality, and then being clear with others, is really important with Mars opposite Saturn, especially because it's an opposition aspect, which tends to mean that we're going to be dealing with this aspect energy in our interactions with others. It's got a bit of a relationship theme. That said, one of the gifts that I so appreciate from Saturn is the gift of clarity. That sense of seeing things as they really are, like this is the reality of the situation. There's no pretending with Saturn. There's no rose-colored glasses. There's no maybe, maybe, maybe. It's just this is the way it is. And so that gift of clarity is available this week. Now, you might not like what you see, or you might not love what you're understanding is really going on, but you can trust that it is the way things are. So if you do get a reality check this week, use it as a guide for making that major choice. Now that you see things as they really are, do you want to stick with things in their current form? Or does seeing the truth of a situation show you that something is unsustainable here, that you can't keep doing this? Maybe you've been hoping for your boss at work to, adjust expectations, or maybe you're expecting them to hire another staff member, for instance, and you get this to help out with your workload. And then you realize that's not going to happen. Then you have to make a choice. Is the current workload that you're being expected to handle sustainable? Can you keep it up for the next few years? Or is it going to make you break? Because that's the big piece of Saturn, is that sometimes we're in situations that aren't sustainable for us, and we're hoping others are going to help us out or notice or change things so that it becomes more manageable. But when Saturn shows up, sometimes we have to be the one who takes responsibility and says, this just isn't going to work long term. And you don't necessarily have to solve the problem for other people. That's not what Saturn's asking you to do. Saturn's just asking you to be really clear about what you can and can't contribute into the situation that you're in. Saturn really wants you to devote your best efforts towards an undertaking that has lasting potential. And Saturn can help prevent you wasting your most precious resource, your time, on something or someone that isn't deserving. So this might apply at work, with family, in a romantic situation, regarding a friend or a group commitment, or a variety of other situations. It doesn't mean everything in your life needs to be ditched or changed, or you need to remove yourself from those situations, but you just need to be a little clearer. First of all, we've got to be clearer with ourselves, but then to try and express that to others. Like, that's not going to work for me, or that's outside my budget, or that time of day doesn't work for me. And it could be as simple as, I'm happy to miss out this time round, but in the future, maybe we can keep things at a different price point, or we could do things at a different time of day, what have you. And so whenever we get these big Mars Saturn aspects, we sort of get this lesson or this reality check. And sometimes it is a little bit confronting. But Saturn is ultimately available to help you reshape your life towards something that is simpler and more reasonable, so that you're not so tired and you're not so spread thin and you're not so exhausted or burdened. And Saturn is really trying to help you have less of a drain on your time and your energy. So this week, as Mars opposes Saturn, I really want you to think about who or what you might need to say no to. Like there might be a distraction or an obligation that is no longer serving you. And saying no to that will mean that you can have more time and energy for what really matters. There is something about rest and slowness that's really uniquely tied to Saturn in Pisces. And if you're doing too much activity to get to that place of rest and restoration, this week might bring a bit of a clarity or a realization about that. And I'm hoping that that Saturn helps each of us with that kind of strength or fortitude to do the restructuring that's going to bring our commitments and our time obligations back into a more manageable space. So let me know about your experiences with Mars opposite Saturn this week in the comments section below. If you would like to learn more about Saturn transits, I have a coupon code that you can use to save 10% off my Saturn transits webinars. One of these webinars covers Saturn transiting through each of the 12 houses. So it talks about Saturn transiting the first and the second and the third, all the way around to Saturn transiting the 12th house, with tips on how to work with that cycle productively. The second webinar covers transit Saturn in aspect to the planets. So if transiting Saturn is aspecting your natal sun or moon or Mercury, Venus, Mars, or Jupiter, that webinar has lots of insights and tips to help guide you through that transit. So the coupon code to save 10% off either of my Saturn transit webinars is SP10, and we'll include this in the show notes. So you can use that when you check out at kellysastrology.com. Thank you all for listening, and I will see you next week. Bye for now.